Hey there. So I'm going to go over our assignment 3.6 and I'll include this in the assignment in the hope that it helps you. If for some reason you have to miss class, this will allow you to stay caught up and not get caught and fall behind. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about first and second hand evidence today. I get a little bit of an exercise with the textbook. And I'm actually going to leverage the textbook today. Hopefully by now you've got your textbook marked and you log into your textbook. And when you do, you're going to see that I've added first hand evidence and second hand evidence and shaping argument, all of this to your assignment. It actually says we want you to read pages 96 through 105 in the text. It's not a lot of reading, but it also says I strongly suggest you download the ebook and annotate. What did I mean when I said that? If you go to your textbook and you have right in here under the help menu, this thing that says download offline ebook, I did the download for you in advance, but when you do, it's going to bring you primarily to here. This is usually where it brings you to. And when you log in, you've got a table of contents here. In the table of contents, we're in chapter 3, and we're actually, not only are we there, we can also go down here to the bottom. Let me hide all this mess. And you can move through this down here and kind of get through this way. When I pull this up, it allows me, it allows me to go right to page 96. When I go to page 96, right in there, that's 95. It brought me right above it. There's firsthand evidence. So if you need to, right in here where it says 96 to 105, if you download the ebook, I'll go over it again, download the ebook, it brings you to here. When you're in it, even if you're at home, you can go right to here at the bottom. And when you pull it up, it will allow you to type in 96, and it'll take you right to this spot. And it tends to bring you to the page before it sometimes, but this is where we are. Now, enough about how to navigate the textbook. Let's get into our lesson. First thing, today we're going to talk about firsthand evidence and we're going to talk about secondhand evidence. This is the firsthand evidence is firsthand. It's the evidence that you have that you know from your personal experience. And there's a couple of different ways to leverage that. The first is talking about personal experience. Personal experience is valuable. It realized that that connects to ethos. If you're a world class expert, your personal experience is going to have this whole weight to it. If you're speaking about issues from a group you're a member of, or issues that you can connect your audience on, this can be very powerful. And so, this, for example, is a great article by Jennifer Oladipo. I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly, and she has an article about why can't environmentalism be colorblind? And it's an article that you're going to have to read that talks about how folks of color are not as necessarily involved in environmentalist causes as you would think. Now, I'm not a big fan of the word colorblind. That's a whole separate conversation because I believe that we should be seeing people for their color, but that's just my personal belief. And that doesn't mean we should be prejudiced against other people. But if I'm going to see you and you're going to see me, well, then whatever ethnic or racial background we're from, that's a part of who we are. So we should appreciate and love one another for that, not irrespective of that. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, let's see what she has to say. I'm asking you to look at this for evidence of first person personal experience. So let's take a look at the first paragraph. In the nearly 2 years of volunteering and working at an urban nature preserve, I have never seen another face like mine come through our doors. Hmm, that's a very good example of personal experience. I'm going to highlight it. You notice the highlighter comes up. I'm going to pick blue because I like that color. And if I do, I click on it again, I can actually add language such as, I have never seen another face like mine is personal. That's personal experience. I may even want to make notes. G sets herself up as an expert because she's a person of color. I'll use English. And then ethos. I'll even write that in for myself. So I have that note for myself later on. You'll notice that it stays there. Now I go on to read by clicking over here and it stays here. But if I want to look at my note, it's right there. You'll also note, by the way, I can create flashcards. So if I wanted to create flashcards, you can play with that flashcard deck. That may help you with your notes to copy and paste stuff right into the article. Also, they have this thing called read aloud from here. If you're like me, I like to have books read to me, and they've got some read aloud options here. So if I click it,
in nearly 2 years of volunteering and working at an urban nature preserve, I have never seen another face like mine come through our doors.
It's obviously digital, it's obviously computer. They did give you options in their settings where you can pick other voices. I like British and Irish sounding names, and so I might do that if I wanted it to suddenly become Australian. I could go in here and
Jaws. At least, I've not seen another black woman come for a morning hike or native wildlife program.
so if I wanted somebody to read me to me like they were from Australia, I could do that. It's just something you have. Anyway, back to it. I'm going to leave this little toy and I'm going to say, okay, we've got this thing going on, or we're going to read about this. Let me find one other piece of personal information. Um, Here, I like this statement here. When I commute to the bus by to the preserve in the located in the middle of Louisville, I disembark with other minorities, yet none of them seems to make it to the trails. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in as a highlight, and I'll say she notes that it's not just about geography, because she's saying other people. Geography, geography. You'll notice that is, and she's, I'm just putting that in there that she's making that argument because there are people of color coming to the preserve. They're just not getting involved. We can read on and find out what her point is, but those are two different pieces of information. Now, each one of these has what's called a fallacy alert. Now, we've done some work with logical fallacies. This is a fallacy example called the hasty generalization. You have to be careful that it's a legitimate personal experience versus one like this, where you say, pulling wisdom teeth is just another unnecessary and painful medical procedure. I still have all mine and they haven't given me any problems. And then I could, for example, highlight this and I could put it in red and I could make a note saying, that's ridiculous. There are lots of wisdom tooth procedures all the time. So just because you haven't had the problem doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I could make a note to myself on that. Now, anecdotes. Anecdotes are kind of cool. Anecdotes say, things like firsthand evidence also includes evidence anecdotes. And the following is an excerpt that argues against the policy that children are born in the United States and are immigrants who are undocumented must be treated as non-residents. To make the case about unfairness, he's making a case about unfairness in terms of kids who are coming in, who are children of undocumented parents, aren't getting the same in-state tuition opportunities that other kids are who are living in the state. Now, they've lived in the state their whole lives, they're residents of the state their whole lives, but because their parents are undocumented, they don't get the in-state tuition break. And that's significant because oftentimes in-state tuition for state schools will double for out-of-state residents. So it's huge. So he puts in this little thing about I left my lamp beside the golden door, that Lady Liberty quote, right? So here he goes. He says, when he talks about anecdotes, and in here, he's got down in here, I'm going to go right to it. Students like Wendy Ruiz, born and raised in this statement right here. Students like Wendy Ruiz, born and raised in Miami, have to pay out-of-state tuition rates that are more than 3 times what other Florida resident students pay for their tuition. Ruiz has lived in the state all her life. So you could say, and I'll just throw in blue because I like to use blue. I can say, student, or so I'll say personal story example of in-state resident not getting tuition. So this is a valid example, right? And so I'm going to consider that a valid example. Here's another one: current events. And this was around 2016. It was right after Trump was elected, and there was a huge body of work that happened in the media where people talked about it being a white lash, and people, matter of fact, Chris Hayes, I remember him saying that right after Trump was elected, this was a white lash, and this person, Charles Camosy, saying, I don't agree. In matter of fact, and he used some current events pieces to say that Trump won because college educated Americans are out of touch. And for example, he put in from current events an example right in here. 29% of Latinos voted for Trump per exit polls. Remarkably, despite the near ubiquitous narrative that Trump would have deep problems with this demographic, given his comments, and position on immigration, this is a higher percentage of those who voted for GOP Mitt Romney in 2012. So, in other words, he uses this to say, uses evidence that more Latinx people voted Trump than expected. Appeals to logos, data, and stats. All right, so for me, that's an appeal to logos. Right, so I'm going to click off of that. So that's an appeal to logos. Now, secondhand evidence, it's like it, only different. Secondhand evidence means they go through research, reading, investigation. This is stuff that I'm not seeing in the news right now. This is stuff we see in the news right now. It's current events. It's kind of firsthand. Even though it's not his personal experience, he's reading the information right now versus history. Right in here, historical information that talks about, for example, bigotry was very much the symbol of period of prohibition, and then he has this statement in here. It was the only time that the Ku Klux Klan paraded en masse through the nation's capital. So this is, and just so you know, he's talking about a time when the Klan actually did run a parade through the nation's capital. So historical, he wasn't there in 1921, had to look in history books. So appeals to logos and pathos, blah, blah, blah. And I can put in some notes on that, right? That's an example on that. Now, the fallacy alert on this is this wonderful statement, and I love the statement because it was actually based on a West Wing episode that I really enjoyed that was also called Post Hoc Ergo Propter Hoc. And that's a Latin term for after which, therefore, because of which. In other words, because this happened after that, the second thing caused the first thing. And that's not necessarily true. And this is a great one. We elected Johnson as president, and look where it got us. Hurricanes, floods, stock market crashes. So we elected President Johnson, and we got a stock market crash and floods. I don't know that you can blame the president for the stock market crash, although politicians try to do this all the time. You certainly can't blame a politician on a hurricane. That's a little bit of a rough case to make. So I can put in here, and I could put in a note that says, and I'll use red, and I'll say, you can't blame a storm on a politician, although it's fun sometimes, because it is fun sometimes. So it's one of the things that you can't do. Expert opinion. This is a great example. Most everyone's the expert on something, but you do want to take a look at, this is a great example from the princess culture, Just a Little Princess, talking about the princess culture. And now this is someone who's pulling in a professor who pulls in a quote that says, historically, princess worship has emerged during periods of uncertainty and profound social change. This is talking about that whole notion of the Disney princesses have got to be there for girls, and girls need that as part of the growing up years. And Disney princesses, I personally don't think they're evil, but you do have to watch what they're about, because not all the examples of Disney princesses are particularly strong, particularly in a contemporary mindset. So, uses a college professor, instant ethos, that kind of a thing. Now, that's what's explaining that. Now, the fallacy is you have to be careful not to pick someone who's an authority just because they're a celebrity. And my favorite example of this is the one that you just did. When we look at your this one, George Clooney, somehow or another, because we're putting him in as a TV star, that he's an expert on watches and on going to the moon. George Clooney is an expert on George Clooney, and if you like his acting, you can consider him an expert on acting. That doesn't make him an expert on watches, fashion, or going to the moon. And so this is the context in what we put it. So that's what we call a logical fallacy. It's kind of neat when they put that out there when you talk about expert opinion. Quantitative evidence, that is great. Quantitative evidence means stats, polls, census information, things like that. Um, this person, for example, is talking about more time in the school year, and they use children in South Korea will spend almost 2 years more than Americans by the end of high school. That is using quantitative evidence, and there, I'll just mark it in here. 2 years uses hard data. Hard data tends to commit to logos, tends to be something that commits to that. So let's make sure you're, thinking in those terms, but then make sure it's a legit way of using that. The fact that they're 2 years in school, for example, is often used in my field to say we should make the school year longer. I believe that you might benefit from a different structure to your school year, but I don't necessarily agree, for example, that adding 20 days to your school year, if what we're doing isn't working, doing it for 20 days more isn't going to suddenly make it work better. So I think it's a combination of how we do school and what we do and how long we do it. I think there's a conversation to be had. But the point is, right here is a great example. You should vote to elect Rachel Johnson. She has a strong lead in the polls. Well, and they make a good argument here. Polling does not necessarily make Senator Johnson the best, and now put that in as a logical fallacy. Popularity does not make someone wise, smart, or right. All right. And I think if you've ever spent any time in high school in the social situation, you'll realize that being popular doesn't make you right. It just sometimes makes people listen to you. Now, right here, this is your activity for today. And I'm going to jump to the actual activity right here. You are going to go into this activity right in here in Google Classroom, and you are going to mark it up. You each have your own individual copy of this article. It's a wonderful article. It talks about someone who uses their experience in social media and the reaction they got on social media to the passing of their dog. And they put up that post in one day in their personal social media stream. And then they put up something very public where they took to task a decision to take military action overseas. And this person, Christoph got a lot of support about his passing of his dog, and he got excoriated and vilified for saying that this particular military strike was a good idea and to have commentary about the military strike. And so he's kind of making the point, why did I get so much love and so much response about my dog, but not these poor refugees overseas? And it's an interesting logical argument. Your job is to find out two pieces of firsthand evidence and two pieces of secondhand evidence. Tell me whether it appeals to logos, pathos, or ethos, how it does that, and whether it's a legitimate or fallacious use of that and why. I want you to evaluate whether it's legit or fallacious, okay? Legitimate meaning it's a legit use of the term, or fallacious meaning the logic isn't standing up here. It's false logic. You're going to do 4 of them based on that, okay? So pull that out of here, annotate it, use your Google Classroom tools, the Google Docs tools, fill this out, click turn in when you're done. That's your assignment. I hope it helps. If you don't know, if you need help or in any way, just go to tutoring. See me for extra help. I'm after school. See me during office hours. I'm there for you guys. Okay? Thanks so much for watching. I hope this helps.